A low hum vibrated through the walls of Redhaven's engineering bay, a subtle reminder that even settlements buried beneath Martian dust had their own heartbeat. Cassian Locke, knee-deep in wires and regrets, wasn't exactly thrilled about spending another day elbow-deep in malfunctioning tech. But hey, when life hands you lemons, you make sure the oxygen filters don't drink them first. Piece of crap, Cassian muttered, yanking a stubborn cable free. It was just his luck to babysit a system older than his grandmother's favorite conspiracy theories. I swear, one more glitch and I'm moving to a colony where the sun actually shines. His companion in this subterranean purgatory, leaned against a console, her eyes dancing with sarcastic amusement. Yeah, because we all know how much you'd love Earth with its wars and taxes, Cassian snorted. At least Earth doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Mars is like that one friend who insists they're just fine while bleeding out on your couch. Reed chuckled, tossing a spare part at him. Here, catch. I'd hate to see you cry over spilled circuitry. They worked in companionable silence, the kind forged not out of friendship but mutual suffering. Living on Mars was a daily exercise in endurance, and Redhaven was the gym you didn't remember signing up for. A flashing light on the console interrupted their routine. Cassian frowned, the kind of frown that suggested he was either solving an engineering problem or trying to remember if he left his coffee on the counter. Got a weird anomaly on the asteroid data feed. Perked up, interested but wary. Don't tell me the rocks are finally sending us hate mail. Close, Cassian said, squinting at the screen. There's something odd. Changes in trajectory that shouldn't be there. Aliens? Suggested, only half joking. On Mars, you learn not to dismiss anything too quickly, not after that incident with the rogue AI and the affectionate vacuum cleaner. Cassian tapped the screen, his concentration narrowing. Unlikely, probably just another software glitch. But if it's not, we might have a problem bigger than the cafeteria's mystery meat. Not the meat again, shuddered. I'd rather eat vacuum. The console beeped again, insistently now, like a kid with a secret it just had to share. Cassian's expression darkened, the humor bleeding away. Okay, this is no glitch. Something's definitely off. Define off, said, crossing her arms. And make it snappy. I've got a date with a broken hydroponics bay at 6. Cassian hesitated, which was as rare as a Martian sunrise that wasn't blocked by dust storms. Trajectory changes on asteroids. Random energy spikes. Energy spikes. Ree's skepticism was palpable. What, the rocks decide to throw a rave? If they did, we weren't invited, Cassian muttered. This could be external interference, like a neighbor who borrows your lawnmower and returns it with alien graffiti, something like that, he admitted. But we need more data, Ree sighed, resigned. You know what this means, right? We're gonna have to tell the boss. Yeah, Cassian winced. And she's gonna love hearing alien interference in a report. Oh, she'll love it all right, Ree said sarcastically. Like a cat loves baths. Cassian straightened, bracing himself for the inevitable fallout. Let's go ruin her day, then. They left the engineering bay, the hum of the colony following them like a persistent shadow. Redhaven was quiet today, its corridors echoing with the sound of their footsteps and the distant whir of machines endlessly toiling to keep the colony from collapsing into itself. As they entered the command center, the air was thick with the tension of a place that had seen better days, and most of them were yesterday. The walls bore the scars of countless patches, each one a testament to the colony's resilience, or maybe just its stubborn refusal to die. Admiral Juno, Redhaven's leader, was as pragmatic as they came. She had the kind of no-nonsense attitude that could cut through red tape with a glare, and she was currently aiming that stare at Cassian and Ree. What now? She sighed, her voice the embodiment of I've seen it all and then some. Cassian hesitated just a moment too long and Ree jumped in. We've got potential alien interference, ma'am. Juno's eyebrows shot up. Potential. Trajectory anomalies, Cassian clarified. Energy spikes. Could be a glitch, Ree added helpfully. Or Martians. Juno didn't laugh, she didn't even blink. And you think this how? Cashin shifted uncomfortably, all too aware of the command center's curious eyes. It's a pattern, Admiral, not random. Juno considered them, her expression unreadable. Fix it, she said finally, before it turns into a problem. Already on it, Cashin assured, though his confidence was more artistic than realistic. Good, because the last thing we need is an alien war over asteroid rights. Cashin and Ree exchanged a look, the kind that said this day just keeps getting better. As they left, Ree nudged him. You think it's really aliens? I think we're screwed either way, Cashin replied. Alien or not, someone's trying to mess with our rocks. Guess it's time to play detective, Ree said with a weary smile, and hope we don't end up regretting it. Regret's just another word for I told you so, Cashin said dryly. Let's just make sure we're the ones saying it. Hours later, Cashin found himself back in the dim confines of the engineering bay, eyes strained from staring at terminal screens and brain buzzing with hypotheses that ranged from plausible to downright ludicrous. Somewhere in this mess was the truth, and he just had to dig it out before it buried them all. Ree was beside him, her presence a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone in this mess. Find anything yet, Sherlock? Just more data to make me question my career choices, Cashin replied. Seriously, why couldn't I have been a bartender? Ree laughed, a rare sound these days. With your people's skills. You'd last about 5 minutes before someone threw a drink at you. Sounds like an average Tuesday, he muttered, eyes flicking back to the screen. Look here, patterns of interference. It's like someone's trying to redirect the asteroids, or make them dance, Ree quipped. But why? Could be a prank, Cashin said, though he didn't believe it for a second. Or sabotage. Sabotage, Ree repeated, eyes narrowing. Who'd want to sabotage a bunch of rocks? Someone with a twisted sense of humor, Cashin guessed. Or someone who knows more than we do. The console beeped again, a persistent reminder of their precarious situation. Cashin studied the readout, his heart sinking. This isn't just interference, it's a targeting system. Ree paled. Targeting. As in, someone's lining these up to hit us, Cashin finished, his voice flat with the weight of impending doom. Ree let out a low whistle. Well, shit. Cashin nodded, feeling the gravity of their situation settle over him like an unwanted houseguest. We need to warn Juno. Ree was already moving, urgency in every step. And fast. Because if someone's declared war on us, I'd rather not be the one who sends out the invitations. Cashin followed, a grim determination in his stride. Yeah, because nothing says welcome to Redhaven like a meteor shower. They rushed through the corridors, a sense of urgency propelling them forward. As they reached the command center, Cashin's mind was a whirl of possibilities, each more daunting than the last. What kind of enemy used asteroids as weapons? And why target a colony that had the strategic importance of a broken toaster? Juno was waiting for them, eyes sharp and calculating. Got more bad news, Cashin nodded, not bothering with the preamble. We've got asteroids being redirected, some kind of targeting system. Juno absorbed this, her expression never wavering. Time frame? Hours, maybe, Ree said, her tone matching the gravity of the situation. Juno nodded as if she'd been expecting this all along. Get everyone into the shelters, prep the defenses. Cashin and Ree turned to leave, but Juno's voice stopped them. And Cashin, he looked back, waiting. Find out who's behind this, and why. Because I'll be damned if I let some space jockeys think they can push us around. Cashin nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Looks like we're not moving to Earth anytime soon. Juno snorted. Mars might be a dust bowl, but it's our dust bowl. Let's make sure it stays that way. As the alarms began to sound, Cashin felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was the certainty of the threat, or perhaps just the realization that in this chaotic universe, the one thing you could always count on was that there'd always be another problem to solve. And if you survived, well, then you could laugh about it over a drink. Let's get to work, he said to Ree, his resolve solidifying with each step. We've got a mystery to solve and rocks to dodge. Ree grinned, a touch of madness in her eyes. Sounds like fun. They moved with purpose, ready to face whatever or whoever had decided to play cosmic billiards with their lives. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival, it was about sending a message. And if there was one thing Cashin and the people of Redhaven knew how to do, it was make themselves heard, even out here in the dusty Martian dark. Cashin and Ree hustled down the colony corridors like two reluctant heroes in a bad space opera. The walls, streaked with Martian dust and desperation, loomed around them like a constant reminder that they lived on a planet where nothing but trouble came easy. "Do you think Mira's going to believe any of this?" Ree asked, her voice laced with doubt as they hurried to the administration hub. "Believe it? Hell, she'll laugh and ask if we're on the latest drug sweeping through the air filters," Cashin replied. "But she's the boss, and bosses love nothing more than dealing with existential threats during their coffee breaks." They reached the stark, utilitarian office of Mira Albright, the colony's leader, who possessed all the warmth of a Martian winter. Her idea of a motivational speech was "don't die." Cashin respected that. Mira was seated behind her desk, a holographic display projecting streams of data like a light show at a concert where the headliner was disappointment. She looked up, her expression registering at least mild annoyance. "Lock Ree, you're back sooner than I hoped. What's on fire now?" She didn't bother mincing words, she never had. "Oh, just the usual, asteroids being redirected by an unseen hand." "You know, the kind of thing that brightens up a dull Tuesday," Ree said, her tone as dry as the Martian soil outside. Mira's eyes narrowed. "Redirection?" Cashin nodded, stepping forward. "Yeah, someone out there thinks it's fun to play cosmic billiards. We're seeing patterns in the data. It's deliberate, could be sabotage, could be aliens. Could be a rogue AI with a god complex." Mira sighed, rubbing her temples as if she could wipe away the headache that was her life. "Let me get this straight. You're telling me we might be under attack by rocks, pretty much," Cashin confirmed, not missing a beat. "Though, considering our finest defense system is a bunch of rusting turrets and hope, I'd say it's effective." Ree leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We're just trying to figure out the why and the who. It's the how that's currently trying to rearrange our landscape." Mira's lips thinned into a line that could have cut steel. "We don't have the luxury to indulge in conspiracy theories. Just fix it, Cashin. And if you can't fix it, at least make sure it doesn't hit my office." "That's the plan, more or less," Cashin replied. "We'll need access to the mainframe and a team to crunch the data. This is bigger than a one-man job." Mira nodded, albeit reluctantly. "You've got it. But if this turns out to be a wild goose chase," Ree grinned, "we'll bring the feathers back as evidence." They left the office with Mira's resigned acceptance hanging over them like a cloud of acid rain. Cashin couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to go from bad to worse. But then that was life on Mars, a series of unfortunate events punctuated by the occasional miracle. "So, what's our next move?" Ree asked, matching his pace down the hall. "We hit the data hard. Look for anomalies, any signs of external interference. If someone's trying to screw with us, they'll have left fingerprints, metaphorically speaking. Right, because actual fingerprints would be too easy. Besides, who doesn't love a good mystery when their lives hang in the balance?" Ree quipped. They headed back to the engineering bay, the colony's heart where the beat was steady but strained. The machines sputtered and wheezed, much like the people who depended on them. Cashin settled into his workstation, screens lighting up with streams of numbers and graphs that seemed to mock his limited understanding. Ree took the seat next to him, cracking her knuckles. "All right, let's play detective. You know I always wanted to be a PI, in another life really." "I figured you more for a space pirate," Cashin replied as his fingers danced over the keyboard. "I mean, you've got the attitude for it. Space pirates have better dental plans," Ree shot back, her eyes scanning the data. "So what are we looking for again?" "Patterns. Irregularities. Anything that screams I'm not supposed to be here," Cashin explained. Hours passed in a grueling blur of coffee breaks and sarcastic commentary. Occasionally, Ree would find something interesting enough to break the monotony, but it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack made entirely of needles. "This one's promising," Ree said, motioning to a graph that looked like a toddler's art project. "Check this out, there's a consistent spike every 4 hours, like clockwork." Cashin leaned in, squinting at the display. "Could be a signal or someone's very regular bathroom breaks." Ree shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Funny, but if it is a signal, it's being transmitted on a frequency we haven't seen before. It's almost like a code." Cashin grinned. "Well, let's break it then." I always did enjoy a good puzzle. They worked together, their banter filling the space with a lightness that belied the gravity of their task. Cashin's mind raced, analyzing and reanalyzing, chasing down possible solutions like a dog chasing its own tail. Then, a breakthrough. The data unraveled before them, a string of coordinates and directives that made their blood run cold. "Shit," Ree breathed, staring at the screen. "This isn't just random, it's a map. These rocks aren't just being redirected, they are being aimed." Cashin's mind spun. "Aimed at what?" Ree's voice was tight. "Our mining operations. Someone wants to cripple us." Cashin cursed under his breath. The colony's mining ops were their lifeline, the only thing keeping them from packing up and leaving Mars to the dust storms. If those got hit... "Okay, new plan," Cashin said, his mind racing. "We need to get this info to Mira. This isn't just a theoretical problem anymore. It's a goddamn war." They scrambled to their feet, urgency rekindling the fire in their veins. The stakes had never been this high, and as they ran through the colony's winding corridors, Cashin couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. They burst into Mira's office without knocking, decorum be damned. The leader of their beleaguered little colony looked up, her eyes narrowing at their disheveled appearance. "What now?" she asked, though her tone had shifted, a sharpness, a readiness. She knew when something was off. Cashin didn't bother with the preamble. "It's not just interference, it's targeted strikes. Someone's aiming these asteroids at our mining ops." Mira's expression hardened like concrete drying. "You're sure?" "As sure as anything," Ree said, holding Mira's gaze with an intensity that burned. "It's deliberate. We have the data to prove it." Mira considered them for a long moment, weighing their words like they were a balance of life and death. Finally, she nodded, decision made. "All right. We'll go into lockdown until we can figure this out. I'll inform the teams." Cashin breathed a small sigh of relief. At least they were doing something, but there was still a long road ahead. "And what about whoever's behind this?" Ree asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Mira's smile was more of a baring of teeth. "Find them. And when you do, make sure they understand what happens when you mess with Redhaven. No one uses our rocks against us." They left Mira's office with purpose, a renewed sense of urgency driving them. The colony was on high alert now, its people moving with a frenetic energy that spoke of fear and determination. "Think we'll figure out who's behind this?" Ree asked as they headed back to the engineering bay. Cashin shrugged. "I hope so. Otherwise, we're just sitting ducks in a shooting gallery." Ree made a face. "I hate ducks." "Me too," Cashin agreed, his voice laced with irony as they resumed their grim task. "But let's hope we're the ones doing the hunting." The hours ticked by, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like a Martian dust storm. But in the depths of their desperation, there was a flicker of determination, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. Because if there was one thing Cashin and Ree knew, it was that life on Mars might be a never-ending series of challenges, but it was their life, and they'd fight tooth and nail to protect it, one asteroid at a time. The Nkali had been observing the humans of Mars for some time, their interest piqued by the erratic, yet strangely effective antics of this peculiar species. The Nkali were a race that prided themselves on their logical approach to any situation. They viewed the universe as a complex game of chess, one where they always had the upper hand. But humans, well, they played by a different set of rules. Rules that seemed more akin to a bar brawl with a side of poker. From their vantage point in the stars, the Nkali watched as Cashin Locke and his band of misfits began to unravel the mystery of the redirected asteroids. What the Inkali hadn't counted on was the sheer stubbornness and ingenuity that humans seem to possess in spades. Back in the cramped corridors of Redhaven, Cashin was neck-deep in wires and circuits, muttering curses that would have made a sailor blush. "All right, Ree, let's see if we can't rig this mess into something that won't blow us to hell." Ree, her dry humor as constant as the Martian dust, quipped, "You know, if this engineering thing doesn't work out, you've got a future as a demolition expert. Just without the pay or perks." "Oh, the perks are there," Cashin replied, gesturing to the pile of malfunctioning tech. "You just have to enjoy the smell of burnt circuitry and existential dread." They were in the engineering bay, a space that, on a good day, looked like a scrapyard explosion. Today, it was more like the aftermath of a failed science fair project. Cashin was trying to recalibrate the asteroid data feed, his mind running through possibilities quicker than the old processors could keep up. "Okay, here's the plan," Cashin said after a few moments of silent tinkering that involved more prayer than precision. "We reroute the data feed through the backup systems. It'll give us a clearer picture of what's out there, and maybe, just maybe, allow us to send out a decoy signal." "Decoy signal?" Ree asked, leaning in with a skeptical brow raised. "And what do we do with that? Simple," Cashin replied with a grin that was equal parts hope and madness. "We send the asteroids on a wild goose chase. Give them something to aim at that isn't, you know, us." Ree nodded slowly, her brain turning the idea over like a particularly juicy piece of gossip. "So, we're basically hacking the universe to play tag with a bunch of rocks." "Exactly. Because what could possibly go wrong?" Cashin laughed, though the sound was more desperate than amused. Meanwhile, the Inkali had begun to notice the disruption in their carefully orchestrated chaos. The humans were proving to be more resourceful than anticipated, a fact that nettled their alien sensibilities. The Inkali leaders decided to escalate their tactics, introducing a new layer of complexity to the situation. Their game had been simple before, now it required finesse. Back on Mars, the flickering lights in the colony provided a strobe effect as Cashin and Ree went to work. They were a blur of motion, trading tools with the precision of an old married couple or skilled thieves, each focused entirely on the task at hand. "Hand me the stabilizer," Cashin called out. "And not the one that's more duct tape than device." Ree rummaged through the toolbox, muttering, "We have one of those, just find something that might not explode immediately." "I'll take what I can get." An hour later they were ready. "All right," Cashin said, wiping his brow. "This is either going to be the greatest hack since someone decided to add pineapple to pizza, or it's going to end with us as space dust." "Optimism, thy name is Cashin Locke," Ree deadpanned, but there was a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Hit it." Cashin activated the system, heart pounding in his chest. The screens flickered, the data feed surging with a life of its own as their signal shot out into the void. They watched, breathless, as their plan unfolded. The redirected asteroids, previously on a collision course with certain doom, began to adjust their trajectories, heading for empty space. "Ha, take that, you cosmic bastards!" Cashin cheered, punching the air. "We did it." Ree let out a laugh, a rare sound that was like music to his ears. "Never thought I'd be so happy to see a bunch of rocks leave us alone," but their celebration was short-lived. A new alert blared across their monitors, the signal from the Inkali forces stronger than ever. They weren't pleased and they were making it known. Cashin's face fell, his excitement replaced with grim determination. "They're not done with us yet. Looks like we poked the hornet's nest," Ree said grimly. "And they brought friends, yeah, and not the kind that bring casserole," Cashin muttered. "Okay, we need a new plan, and fast." They dove back into the chaos of wires and circuits, improvising as they went. If the Inkali thought they could outsmart human ingenuity with brute force, they were about to learn a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the power of desperation and a complete disregard for the odds. Meanwhile, the Inkali watched with a mix of frustration and admiration. The humans were relentless, refusing to back down even when the stakes were impossibly high. It was a quality they hadn't encountered before, one that made them rethink their approach. Cassian and Ree were in full swing, bouncing ideas off each other like a dysfunctional game of ping-pong. If we reroute the auxiliary power, we might be able to boost the signal enough to block their interference, Cassian suggested. And if that doesn't work? Ree asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Then we go for option B, which is panic. Ree chuckled darkly. I like option B, but let's try your way first. They set to work, their hands moving with a speed born of necessity. The Nkali's interference was relentless, their tactics designed to confuse and overwhelm. But Cassian and Ree pushed forward, fueled by sheer stubbornness and a determination that burned brighter than the Mars sun. Finally, with a jarring lurch, the system came online, the power surging through the circuits in a triumphant symphony of light and sound. They had done it. For now, at least, they had a fighting chance. All right, Nkali, Cassian said, staring at the screen as if daring the aliens to make their next move. Let's see what you've got. Ree leaned back in her chair, exhaustion etched into her features. Think they'll give up, Cassian shrugged. Doubt it. But they've learned something valuable today. Oh yeah. And what's that? That nothing's more dangerous than a couple of humans with nothing left to lose. As the Nkali regrouped, plotting their next move, they couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the humans. They were an unpredictable adversary, one that made the Nkali's carefully laid plans seem inadequate. Back in Redhaven, the weight of what they'd accomplished slowly began to sink in. They'd bought themselves some time, but the battle was far from over. Cassian and Ree knew they'd be back to square one soon enough, but for now they relished their small victory. So what's next? Ree asked, her voice a tired whisper. Next we rest, Cassian said, and then we figure out how to turn this mess into something resembling a long-term solution. Ree smiled, a rare sight that lit up her face. You know, for once that doesn't sound like a terrible idea. The corridors of Redhaven were quiet now, the tension of the day slowly ebbing away. Cassian and Ree sat in companionable silence, the hum of machinery their only companion. They knew the Nkali would be back, and next time they'd be ready. Because one thing was certain, in the vast, unforgiving expanse of space, it wasn't the strongest or the smartest who survived. It was those who refused to be beaten, who stood up each time they were knocked down. And if there was one thing the humans on Mars had in abundance, it was the stubborn refusal to go gently into that cold, dark night. As the alien observers finally logged off for the night, frustrated by their inability to crack the human spirit, Cassian and Ree exchanged a tired but triumphant glance. They had done more than survive, they had fought back. Let's get some sleep, Cassian finally said, stretching his aching limbs. Yeah, we'll need our energy for the next round of who's trying to kill us today, Cassian chuckled. Sounds like a plan. See you in the morning, Ree. They parted ways, each knowing that while the Nkali might be formidable, they had something much more powerful on their side. The knowledge that they were in this together, and together they could face whatever the universe threw their way. Cassian Locke sat in the administration hub, staring at a holographic display that flickered like an old neon sign on the fritz. Mira Albright leaned back in her utilitarian chair, the kind that screamed comfort is a privilege, not a right. So, what's the latest on our cosmic pen pals? Cassian asked, trying to ignore the faint scent of despair that lingered in the air like a bad cologne. Mira tapped a few keys, summoning streams of data that danced across the display. The Nkali are getting creative, she said, her voice as dry as the Martian surface. Looks like they've moved beyond just throwing rocks. Now they're trying out psychological warfare. Psychological warfare. Cassian raised an eyebrow. What, did they send us spam emails offering discount Viagra? Worse, Mira replied, a rare hint of emotion creeping into her voice. They're studying human hope. That's a weapon now. Cassian snorted. Next you'll tell me they're using anxiety as a biological agent. Laugh it up, Locke, Mira said, eyes cold as the Martian winter, but they're serious. They're analyzing how hope keeps us going, How it makes us fight back even when we should have given up ages ago. Cashin mulled that over, his mind turning the idea around like a Rubik's Cube. So they're trying to snuff out our hope. Isn't that cute? Adorable, Mira agreed. Except for the part where it's working, Cashin didn't bother pretending to be surprised. Life on Mars was already one big cosmic joke, and the punchline wasn't getting any funnier. All right, so what do we do? Throw a pep rally, something like that, Mira said, though her expression suggested she'd rather juggle live grenades. We need to keep morale high. The Nkali are banking on our desperation. Desperation is our secret weapon, Cashin grunted. They don't get that yet, Mira let out a humorless chuckle. No, they don't. But they will. Cashin pushed back from the desk, his chair scraping against the floor with the subtlety of a screeching banshee. Guess it's time I play motivational speaker. Don't die, Mira said, offering the colony's unofficial motto with a wave of her hand. Cashin rolled his eyes. Inspiring as always, Mira. Get out of here, Locke, she said with a dismissive flick of her fingers. Go spread some of that infamous optimism of yours. Optimism, Cashin said, feigning shock as he headed for the door. I think you've got me confused with someone who has a reason to smile. He found Ree in their makeshift workshop, half buried under a mountain of wires. She looked up as he entered, her face smeared with streaks of grease and the universal expression of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. Hey, boss, she greeted, her voice thick with sarcasm. Heard you're the new Tony Robbins of Mars. Great. I always wanted to sell snake oil, Cashin replied, pulling up a crate to sit on. Have you heard the good news? Hope is a weapon now, Ree snorted, tossing a wrench into the toolbox with a metallic clatter. About time someone weaponized good vibes. Yeah, well, Mira wants us to keep the cheer train rolling. Nkali are banking on us running out of steam. Guess they don't know that we're all fueled by spite and caffeine, Ree said, her eyes twinkling with mischief despite the grimness of the situation. Cashin nodded, glancing around at the chaos of their workshop. So, any ideas on how to inject some hope into our fellow Martians? Ree tapped a finger against her chin. Could try staging a fake alien invasion. At least then we could unite everyone through shared terror, Pass, Cashin said. But I like where your head's at. They fell into a comfortable silence, both lost in thought as they considered the best way to rally their weary colony. Outside, the red dust swirled in the feeble Martian wind, as if even the planet was trying to make things difficult. Cashin was the first to break the quiet. Maybe we throw a party. You know that we survived another day without getting obliterated kind. Ree grinned. Nothing says morale boost like bad music and questionable rations. Exactly. Plus, we've got that stash of homebrew hidden in the storage bay. Might as well put it to use before it mutates into something sentient. Sold, Ree said, her mood lifting ever so slightly. I'll spread the word. And I promise to refrain from DJing, Cashin chuckled. The colony thanks you later. As the artificial night descended over Redhaven, Cashin stood on a makeshift stage in the colony's central hub. A crowd of weary faces stared back at him, each expression a blend of skepticism and curiosity. Ree stood beside him, arms crossed, her presence a silent vote of confidence. All right, folks, Cashin began, his voice echoing off the metal walls. I know things have been a bit grim lately. The Nkali are pushing harder than ever, and it feels like we're living under a permanent rain cloud. But here's the thing. We're still here. We're still breathing Martian dust and complaining about it every damn day. A few chuckles rose from the crowd, mingling with the low hum of machinery. Cashin pressed on, buoyed by the sound. We've got a choice, he continued. We can let these alien bastards wear us down, pick us apart until we're shadows of ourselves. Or we can stand up, flip them the universal bird, and show them what humans do best. Survive out of sheer bloody-mindedness. Ree stepped forward, her voice carrying over the crowd. We've got a lot of challenges ahead, no question. But we've also got each other. And as long as we're fighting, we've got a chance. Cashin gestured to the makeshift bar set up at the back of the room, where a few industrious souls had already begun pouring out the homebrewed liquid courage. "So let's raise a glass," he said, "to making it through another day, to hope, or whatever passes for it on this rock, and to giving the Inkali a run for their money." Glasses clinked, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the colony buzzed with something other than despair. It was a small victory, but Cashin knew better than to dismiss the power of small victories. Out here, they were everything. As the night wore on and the music got louder, Cashin found himself leaning against the wall, nursing a drink that tasted like a mixture of regret and rocket fuel. Ree sidled up next to him, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. "Not bad for a guy who hates public speaking," she said, nudging him with her elbow. "Turns out desperation is a great motivator," Cashin replied, taking a sip of his drink and grimacing. "What do you think? Worth all the effort?" Ree's smile was soft, genuine. "Yeah, it is, and hey, if hope doesn't work out, we can always try sarcasm as a weapon." Cashin barked a laugh. "Sarcasm? Hell, we'd be unstoppable." They watched the festivities in silence for a while, the air filled with laughter and clinking glasses. For a brief moment, the world didn't feel so heavy. "Think the Inkali get it now?" Ree asked, her voice thoughtful. Cashin shrugged. "They're learning. Humans don't give up easy. We're like cockroaches, tougher than we look and impossible to get rid of." Ree chuckled. "That's a comforting image. It's what I'm here for," Cashin said, giving her a lopsided grin. As the night wore on, Cashin felt a flicker of something he hadn't in a long time: genuine hope. Maybe they'd figured out a way to keep the flame alive, to push back against the overwhelming odds. Maybe they'd survive this after all. Or maybe they were just stubborn fools, holding onto a dream that was already slipping through their fingers. Either way, Cashin decided, they were going to go down swinging. The Inkali would learn that soon enough. Cashin Locke sat at his usual corner in the administration hub, staring at the holographic display that flickered more than an old Earth light bulb on its last gasp. The air was thick with tension, like the oppressive silence before a cosmic storm. He'd never been a fan of dramatic metaphors, but damned if this didn't feel like one. Ree sauntered up, her coveralls stained with the kind of grease that could only be acquired by wrestling with the guts of a machine that seemed hell-bent on malfunctioning. She flopped into the chair opposite him, kicking her boots up onto the table. "So, boss, heard the morale around here is lower than a snake's belly in a Martian ditch." "That optimistic, huh?" Cashin replied, drumming his fingers on the desk. "I thought we were aiming for the abyss." Ree's laugh was more of a snort, but it was the closest thing to humor he'd heard all day. "Well, if it's any comfort, we're definitely succeeding at something." Cashin rolled his eyes. "You know things are bad when failure becomes a benchmark for success." Mira Albright appeared, her expression as cheerful as a dentist's drill. "Got some new data from our friends, the Inkali," she said, tapping on the display. "They've gotten more creative, like mastermind villain creative." Cashin sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Let me guess, they've shifted from rock throwing to mind games." "Exactly," Mira replied. "They're broadcasting signals aimed at messing with emotions. Subtle stuff. Makes everyone feel like they're trudging through a fog of hopelessness." "Marvelous," Cashin muttered. "As if the daily grind here wasn't enough to make a grown man weep." Ree leaned forward, her eyes sparking with a mischievous light. "So, what's the plan, Cashin? Throw yourselves a pity party. I'd bring the confetti, but I'm fresh out." "Who needs confetti when you've got cosmic despair?" Cashin countered. "But seriously, we need a plan. Otherwise, we'll all drown in this Martian depression and start naming rocks for company." Mira frowned, her eyes fixed on the display as it cycled through endless streams of data. "We need to find a way to disrupt their signals." "Disrupt how?" Ree asked, eyebrow raised. "I'm no expert, but I don't think duct tape is gonna cut it this time." Cashin leaned back in his chair, the creak of the metal like an old man's groan. His mind raced, trying to latch onto something, anything, that might offer a solution. "If only we could send a signal back. Something to scramble their frequencies." Mira's fingers danced over the keyboard. We could try rerouting some old tech. The asteroid data feed maybe. With a bit of tweaking it might just work. Great, Ree said, a wry grin tugging at her lips. Turning ancient junk into space-age tech, that's not gonna backfire at all. Desperate times, desperate measures, Cashin replied. Besides, it's not like we've got a queue of options. They set to work, the hum of machinery providing a steady background to their efforts. The plan was simple enough in theory. Hijack the asteroid data feed, use it to broadcast a counter-signal that could jam the Inkali broadcasts. Of course, in practice, it was about as simple as juggling plasma grenades. Time passed in a blur of wires, cursing, and the occasional burst of static that made them all jump. At one point, Cashin glanced over at Ree, who was elbow-deep in circuitry. Remind me again why we signed up for this. Ree didn't even look up. I think it had something to do with the promise of adventure and a new frontier. Ah, right, Cashin said dryly. They forgot to mention the fine print about existential dread and imminent extinction. As the Iors dragged on, Cashin's mind wandered to the rest of the colony. They were a tough bunch, no doubt about it, but even the hardiest spirit could break under the right pressure. The Inkali's psychological screws were tightening, and it was only a matter of time before they'd all crack wide open. Finally, as the Martian twilight settled over Redhaven like a dusty blanket, Mira let out a triumphant shout. I think I've got it. Cashin and Ree exchanged a quick look of disbelief before rushing over to join her. The display now showed a new line of code, a shimmering thread of hope in the darkness. This should disrupt their signal, Mira explained, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. At least for a while. That's the best damn news I've heard all year, Cashin said. Let's give it a go. They activated the modified feed and for a tense minute nothing happened. Then slowly, like a fog lifting, the oppressive weight in the room seemed to ease. It wasn't much, just a slight lightening of the air, but it was enough to breathe again. Ree slumped back in her chair, grinning like a maniac. Well, what do you know, we might actually be onto something. Cashin clapped her on the shoulder. Nice work, team, let's hope it holds. The small victory was a flicker in the dark, but flickers could grow, and right now they needed every bit of brightness they could muster. As the night wore on, Cashin knew the fight was far from over. The Inkali would adapt, no doubt about it, but for tonight they'd won a round. What's next? Ree asked, yawning as she stretched. Cashin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. We keep this up for as long as we can, and we find some way to remind everyone why we're doing this. No point jamming their signals if we lose our will to fight. Mira nodded. We've got to show the colony that we've still got some fight left in us. Exactly, Cashin said. We need to be ready for whatever they throw at us next. Later, as Cashin walked back to his quarters, he caught snippets of conversation, laughter even. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe they weren't quite finished yet. Inside, he slumped onto the cot, exhaustion pulling at him like gravity. He wondered how long they could keep this up before everything came crashing down. But there was no time for self-pity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to outmaneuver the Inkali's clever games. Cashin knew one thing for sure, they weren't going to go quietly. As he drifted into a restless sleep, Cashin clung to one thought. Humans were nothing if not resilient. And as long as they kept fighting, maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to survive against the odds stacked against them. For now, that small hope was enough to keep the darkness at bay. Cashin Locke awoke with a start, feeling like he'd been smacked in the face with a bag of dull rocks. He groaned, the weight of yesterday's victories already leached away by the unforgiving Martian morning. Resilience, he reminded himself. Humans are all about resilience. The administration hub felt even more cramped than usual as he shuffled in, every console and display silently mocking him with their indifferent flickers. Ree was already there, predictably, fiddling with some piece of tech. Her face bore the same determination it always did, which Cashin found both inspiring and slightly irritating. Morning sunshine, she quipped, not bothering to look up from what was probably another malfunctioning gizmo. Morning, Cashin grumbled. What's on today's menu? A heaping plate of existential dread with a side of despair, Ree snorted. I was thinking more along the lines of coffee and a few more ways to tick off the Nkali. Breakfast of champions, he replied, settling into his chair with a creak that seemed to echo his body's complaints. Mira appeared moments later, her eyes betraying the same sleeplessness he felt. Got news, she said, her voice as flat as the Martian landscape. The Nkali have started tweaking their signals again. Same old, Cashin sighed. Great. Just when I thought we'd gotten them to back off. What's their latest trick? Making us doubt our fashion choices. Worse, Mira replied, pulling up data that looked more like the scribblings of a mad artist than anything comprehensible. They're ramping up the emotional manipulation. It's like they're trying to turn us into emotional puddles. Sweet, Ree said with mock enthusiasm. I've always wanted to be a blubbering mess. Cashin rubbed his temples, trying to think past the haze of fatigue. We need something more. Our little victory last night isn't going to hold them off forever. We need. Damn, I don't know. A miracle wrong department, Ree said. But I hear the wishful thinking division is open for business. Right, Cashin said, smirking despite himself. Well, let's see if we can't engineer our own miracle. The hum of machinery filled the room as they set to work, the clatter of equipment and the clink of tools providing a familiar background noise. As he sifted through the chaos, Cashin's mind wandered. Memories surfaced, unbidden, of stories his father told him long ago. He'd always dismissed them as fairy tales, nonsense from a time when humanity hadn't yet been humbled by the vastness of space. Yet one story lingered, a tale of a man who built wings from wax and feather, defying gravity's grip. Hope, his father had said, was the only thing that couldn't be taken away by the void. Cashin. Mira's voice broke through his reverie, and he blinked, suddenly aware of the room around him. "Are you okay?" she asked, a rare look of concern on her face. "Yeah, just thinking," he replied, his mind racing. What if hope wasn't just a feeling but something they could harness? Something tangible like the wax and feathers of the ancient myth. Got an idea, he said, suddenly animated. What if we could use the Nkali's own tactics against them? Turn their mind games on their heads. Mira raised an eyebrow. You want to outsmart a race that thinks emotions are a strategic asset. Exactly, Cashin said, feeling a spark of excitement. They think they're the only ones playing the game. But what if we made hope into something they couldn't calculate? Something that's not just a feeling but a force. Ree looked skeptical but intrigued. And how the hell do you plan to do that? We get creative, Cashin said. We rally the colony. Turn every bit of creativity and defiance into a weapon. Mira leaned back, considering. It's insane, but it might just work. Insanity is the mother of invention, Cashin said with a grin, or something like that. All right, I'm in, Ree said, her expression a mix of skepticism and amusement. After all, what's the worst that could happen? We fail spectacularly and all die. At least it'd be entertaining, Cashin barked a laugh. That's the spirit. The plan was ambitious, bordering on reckless. They'd use the colony's resources, old tech, art, music, whatever they could muster, to create a counter-signal that wasn't just noise but a beacon of human creativity and defiance. It was a gamble, but one worth taking. As word spread through Redhaven, something remarkable happened. The oppressive gloom began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. People who'd been trudging through days like zombies suddenly found themselves invigorated, swept up in a wave of determination. Workshops hummed with activity, the air thick with the scent of solder and ambition. Artists painted wild murals across walls, telling stories of Earth's great triumphs and failures. Musicians tuned their instruments, filling the corridors with melodies that echoed the heartbeat of humanity. Cashin moved through the colony, marveling at the transformation. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, turning on a light that had been dimmed for far too long. He stopped by a group of children, watching as they painstakingly strung together makeshift kites from scraps of fabric and wire. "What are those for?" he asked, genuinely curious. One of the kids, a girl with a shock of unruly hair, glanced up. "They're hope kites," she said matter-of-factly. "If you fly them high enough, they carry your hopes up to the sky." Cashin felt a lump in his throat, the simplicity and innocence of the idea striking him like a physical blow. "That's brilliant, thanks," the girl said, beaming with pride. "Wanna make one?" "I think I'd like that," Cashin replied, crouching down to join them. As he worked alongside the children, he felt a warmth spreading through him, a tiny flame of hope burning bright. Later, as dusk settled over Mars, the colony gathered outside. The Martian sky was a canvas of bruised reds and purples, the perfect backdrop for what they planned. Cashin stood with Ree and Mira, the three of them watching as the crowd swelled. "Think this'll work?" Mira asked, her voice a mix of hope and trepidation. "It has to," Ree said. "Besides, we didn't spend all day making those damn kites for nothing." Cashin nodded, feeling the weight of their collective expectations. Here goes nothing. The signal was activated, a symphony of colors and sounds broadcasting into the ether. Cashin held his breath, wondering if the Inkali would even notice. And then it happened. Slowly, the sky filled with kites, each one soaring higher and higher until they were nothing but specks dancing against the Martian twilight. Cheers erupted from the colony, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Cashin felt the energy thrumming through the crowd, a shared defiance that was louder than any signal the Inkali could send. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that they might just pull this off, that they'd given the Inkali something they couldn't predict, couldn't quantify, something that belonged solely to humans. As the night wore on, Cashin found himself standing alone on a ridge overlooking Redhaven, watching the kites flicker and dance. It was a scene plucked from mythology, a story that would be told for generations if they managed to survive this. "Hey," Ree's voice came from behind, and he turned to see her approaching, a grin on her face. "Hey yourself," Cashin replied. "Not bad for a day's work, not bad at all," she agreed, her gaze fixed on the sky. "Think they got the message?" Cashin shrugged. "Who knows? But if they didn't, we'll just keep sending it. Over and over until it sticks." Ree chuckled. "Well, I've always wanted to annoy the hell out of someone with art. It's a start," Cashin said, feeling lighter than he had in years. "And maybe, just maybe, it's enough." They stood in silence, watching the hope kites dance against the Martian sky. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, Cashin felt they had a fighting chance. And that was something the Inkali couldn't take away. The wind picked up, carrying the kites higher, their tails trailing like comets across the darkness. Cashin watched them rise, feeling a quiet determination settle in his chest. For now, they were winning. Tomorrow was another day, and whatever it brought, they'd face it head-on, together. And for Cashin, that was more than enough. The colony hummed with a feverish energy, the kind that could only be fueled by desperation, caffeine, and the stubborn refusal to roll over and die quietly. Cashin leaned against a console that flickered with all the reliability of a politician's promise, taking in the organized chaos that had become their life in Redhaven. His fellow Martians, just as tired, just as determined, scrambled to piece together their shot at rebellion. "All right, folks, if we're gonna make a mess of this, let's at least aim for spectacular," Cashin shouted over the din. It was comforting in a grim way to know that even as their world seemed hell-bent on collapsing, sarcasm remained a universal constant. Ree, elbow-deep in wires from a holographic display that sputtered like a dying star, threw him a glance. "And here I thought you were an optimist, Cashin." "That was before I decided to move to a dust ball where gravity and happiness are in a constant state of leave," he replied, smirking. "So what's the damage?" She waved a hand at the mess of circuits. "Oh, you know, the usual. Just fixing the future of humanity with some spit and a prayer." "No biggie." Mira, standing nearby and tapping furiously on a tablet that looked like it had seen more action than most soldiers, chimed in. "We've got about an hour before the Inkali start their next emotional fireworks show. We better be ready, or we're gonna be crying harder than a soap opera finale." "Great," Cashin said, focusing on the task at hand. "Let's show those aliens what happens when you mess with people who invented punk rock and sarcasm." The plan itself was audacious in its simplicity. Harness the creativity and rebellion that defined humanity, art, music, soul, and broadcast it back at the Inkali. If hope was a weapon, they'd use it to blindside the alien bastards who thought emotions could be flicked on and off like a light switch. An Ior raced by, a blur of frantic effort punctuated only by the occasional curse or burst of laughter. Cashin felt the adrenaline coursing through his veins, keeping the exhaustion at bay. It was game time. They gathered outside, the Martian air biting with a chill that seemed to seep into bones and resolve alike. The colony stood united, a ragtag assembly of engineers, artists, and dreamers ready to wage war with nothing but the strength of their spirit. "All right, folks," Ree called out, her voice echoing across the vast emptiness. "Let's light these suckers up." Cashin nodded to Mira, who hit the button with a flourish that would have made a magician proud. The signal, born from the dreams and defiance of 100 souls, launched into the sky. Color and sound erupted from speakers and projectors, painting the Martian night with humanity's indomitable will. Hope kites unfurled once again, their tails shimmering like comets as they soared. Music, raw, untamed, and full of life, blared across the dust-choked plains, a symphony of rebellion that dared the universe to take notice. Cashin held his breath, watching, waiting. Moments ticked by, each one heavier than the last, until the air seemed to hum with anticipation. And then, like a switch flipped in the cosmic grid, the Inkali's signal faltered. The malevolent broadcast that had seeped into their minds, turning hope into despair, stuttered and cracked, overwhelmed by the chaotic brilliance of human creativity. Cashin exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Did we do it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ree laughed, a sound filled with disbelief and joy. "Looks like it. We might just have sucker-punched them with an entire anthology of human madness." Cheers erupted around them, a cacophony of triumph that echoed across the Martian landscape. Cashin felt a grin stretch across his face, the kind that came from sheer, unrestrained relief. Mira clapped him on the back. "You crazy bastard, I think we actually pulled it off." "Don't sound so surprised," he said, still breathless with adrenaline and victory. "I'm a man of many talents." "Right, like sleeping through your alarm and being a pain in my ass," she shot back with a smirk. Cashin chuckled, basking in the banter, the sheer normalcy of it. They stood there, the three of them, watching as the colony celebrated. Laughter and music mingled with the wind, carrying a message to the stars. Humans would not be so easily defeated. The Inkali, unable to comprehend the weapon that had been turned against them, retreated to regroup. Perhaps they would return, more determined than ever, but for now it was a victory. Cashin knew better than to let his guard down completely. Hope might be a powerful weapon, but it was also fragile, easily shattered by the harsh realities they faced. Yet in this moment, watching the Martian sky dance with kites and dreams, he allowed himself to believe. The night wore on, and the celebrations continued. Cashin found himself wandering through the crowd, exchanging congratulatory slaps on the back and high fives. He passed a group of teenagers who had rigged up a makeshift concert, their instruments cobbled together from scrap but playing with a passion that was anything but. "Hey, Cashin," one of them called, a lanky boy with a shock of blue hair. "You're not half bad for an old guy," Cashin snorted. "Old? I'll have you know I've got at least a decade of irrelevance left in me." They laughed, and he couldn't help but smile. This right here was what it was all about, the spirit, the resilience, the refusal to go quietly into the night. Ree found him some time later, a drink in each hand and a grin on her face. "Here," she said, thrusting one at him. "Figured you might need this." "Thanks," he replied, taking a sip. The drink burned like fire, a welcome warmth against the cold. They stood together, watching as the celebration slowly wound down. People drifted away, exhausted but elated, leaving Cashin and Ree alone beneath the Martian sky. So, Ree said, breaking the comfortable silence. What now? Now, Cashin shrugged. We keep fighting. This was a win, but it doesn't mean the war's over. But at least we know we've got a chance. Yeah, she said, her voice softening. A chance is more than I dared hope for. They lapsed into silence again, content to watch the stars. The universe was a vast, uncaring place full of dangers and uncertainties. But here, in this moment, on this dusty, inhospitable planet, they had carved out a piece of hope, and that was more than enough. As they turned to head back into the colony, Cashin cast one last glance at the kites, still fluttering against the dark. They were a testament to what humanity could achieve, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, they were never truly alone. Hey, Cashin, Ree said, her voice teasing. Think we can pull this off again if we have to? He chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in ages. If we have to, we'll find a way. After all, we did invent rock and roll. How hard can saving the universe be? And with that, they walked back into Redhaven, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The Martian mornings had a peculiar way of sneaking up on you, like a delinquent cat you've kicked out for the night, only to find it purring on your chest at dawn. Redhaven was no different, half dead yet stubbornly alive. Cashin Locke stood outside his pod, yawning and scratching the back of his head as the colony began to stir. He wasn't going to lie. The victory hangover had kicked his ass harder than an ex-wife's lawyer. Mars, in all its red-dusted glory, was a spectacular desert of nothingness, but today it felt almost hopeful. Almost. The kind of hope that came with a warning label. Side effects may include existential dread, unwarranted optimism, and an increased likelihood of sarcasm. Use sparingly. The people of Redhaven were no strangers to rebuilding. Hell, they'd practically made an art form of it. Survival on Mars was basically one long, painful DIY project, minus the satisfaction of fixing anything permanently. But after the Nkali's last failed mind freak, there was a vibe of resilience in the air, a renewed sense of purpose. Or maybe that was just the recycled oxygen. Cashin wandered through the colony's dusty corridors, weaving through the kaleidoscope of humanity at its most determined. Engineers and artists, scientists and dreamers, all going about their routines with the kind of grit that could only be forged in a place where laundry was a life-or-death situation. He found Mira in the administration hub, hunched over her tablet like it was a lover whispering secrets. The console in front of her flickered intermittently, like it couldn't decide whether to have a midlife crisis or just quit altogether. "Mornin', Mira," Cashin greeted, flopping into a chair with all the grace of a drunk giraffe. "You look like you've tangled with a sandstorm and lost." "And here I thought I'd successfully avoided mirrors this morning," Mira shot back, not looking up from her work. "What's on your agenda today? More pretending to work while heroically procrastinating." "Of course," Cashin replied with a smirk. "Someone's gotta maintain the status quo." Mira finally glanced up, her eyes sharp and full of that keen intelligence that always made Cashin feel like he'd skipped one too many classes in school. "Well, status quo or not, we've got to work on strengthening our defenses. The Nkali may have retreated, but they're not gone. They're like bad cologne, lingering and always a little nauseating." Cashin nodded, the weight of responsibility settling like a familiar itch between his shoulder blades. "You think they'll come back with a new trick up their sleeve?" Mira huffed a laugh, tapping away at her tablet like she was trying to teach it Morse code. "You kidding? The Nkali are practically the poster children for if at first you don't succeed, ruin someone else's day. They'll definitely try again. We just need to be ready to punch them in their metaphorical noses." "Good thing we're getting better at throwing punches then," Cashin mused. "But speaking of noses, can we discuss the absolute crime against humanity that is our food supply?" Mira chuckled, finally setting her tablet aside. "I don't know. I think synthetic protein sludge has a certain charm, like a culinary car crash you can't look away from. Or taste away from, unfortunately," Cashin agreed, pulling out one of the nutrient bars from his pocket with a look of resigned disgust. It was the color of despair and tasted like it too. They shared a moment of comfortable silence, punctuated by the console's erratic flickers and the distant sounds of the colony waking up. It was strange, Cashin thought, to find solace in such chaos, but maybe that was the key to their survival, finding peace in the eye of the storm. Redhaven's starting to feel like a real community, Cashin observed, watching through a dusty window as people hustled around, dragging cables and equipment like ants in an improvised colony. You think it's enough to keep us going? Mira's gaze was thoughtful, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the console. Hope's a funny thing, Cashin. The Nkali use it as a weapon, sure, but we've turned it into armor. And if the last few days have taught us anything, it's that our armor's a lot tougher than they gave us credit for. Cashin grinned, feeling that familiar flare of defiance. So what you're saying is, we're stubborn as hell. Basically, yeah, Mira replied, her smile wry. And thank God for that. Or whatever cosmic entity is out there laughing at us. Probably an audience of them munching on popcorn, Cashin said, standing up and stretching. But we can't let the bastards have all the fun. We've got work to do. With a nod of agreement, they left the administration hub, stepping back into the Martian light that filtered through the colony's transparent domes. It was a new day, and there was a lot to be done. Hope might not be tangible, but it was definitely alive and kicking. As they walked, Cashin noticed the subtle changes in the colony. People were more animated, their conversations punctuated by laughter, even as they labored under the relentless Martian sun. Engineers tweaked solar panels, artists painted murals that added splashes of color to the brown-red monotony. It was as if creativity had taken root alongside survival, blooming in the most unlikely of places. They passed a group of kids playing a game with rocks and dust, their shouts and laughter echoing off the domes. Cashin waved to them, receiving enthusiastic waves in return. It was moments like this, he mused, that made the struggle worthwhile. The Nkali might have the technology and logic, but humans had something better: spirit. Think those kids will still have that spirit when they're our age? Mira asked, leaning against a support pillar as they watched the impromptu game unfold. Cashin shrugged, his gaze contemplative. Maybe. Or maybe they'll invent some new kind of spirit, something that suits whatever crazy world they end up inheriting. Optimistic of you, Mira noted, a teasing lilt to her voice. Hey, I can be optimistic, Cashin protested, though the smile on his face said otherwise. I just prefer to keep it on the down low. Wouldn't want to ruin my reputation. They continued their rounds, checking in on various projects and offering encouragement where needed. It was hard work, unglamorous and often frustrating, but it was theirs. Cashin found that he thrived on it, the challenge of making something out of nothing, of confronting adversity with nothing more than a stubborn grin and a willingness to keep going. As the day wore on, Redhaven buzzed with a frenetic energy, the kind that came from a community determined to shape its own destiny. Cashin and Mira coordinated the efforts to upgrade their communication arrays, rigging them to both defend against and confuse any future Nkali signals. It was a delicate dance, one that involved a lot of guesswork and even more swearing, but they made progress. Evening came, bringing with it a rare calm. The sky above Mars deepened to a russet hue, the first stars beginning to twinkle against the backdrop of space. Cashin found himself back at his pod, exhaustion tugging at his senses but satisfaction warming him from the inside out. It was then that rejoined him, pulling up a crate to sit beside him. Her hands were stained with oil and grime, evidence of a hard day's work, but her eyes sparkled with a mischievous light. Ever get the feeling that we're the punchline to some cosmic joke? She asked, handing him a mug of something that smelled suspiciously like alcohol. Cashin accepted it gratefully, taking a sip and savoring the burn. Every damn day, he replied. But I like to think we're the ones laughing in the end. Reed chuckled, leaning back and staring up at the stars. Well, here's to being the universe's favorite fools. They clinked their mugs together, the sound a tiny defiance against the endless night. Cashin knew they still had a long way to go, that the Inkali would return with new tricks and old grudges. But for tonight they had hope, and that was enough. As the darkness settled over Redhaven, painting the colony in shadows and starlight, Cashin felt a peace he hadn't known in years. It wasn't the peace of resolution, but rather the peace that comes with knowing the fight is worth it, that the struggle is shared and the burden is lighter for it. "Think we'll ever get back to Earth?" Ree asked, her voice quiet, almost wistful. Cashin didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Maybe," he said eventually. "But for now, we've got work to do here. Mars might not be home, but it's ours." "Yeah," Ree agreed, her tone thoughtful. "And maybe one day it will be." They sat together in silence, watching as the Martian night unfolded. It was a harsh, unforgiving world, one that demanded everything from those who dared to inhabit it. But it was also a place of potential, of dreams forged from necessity and hope born from grit. And that, Cashin realized, was humanity's greatest strength. Not technology or logic or power, but the ability to find light in the darkest places, to carve out a piece of the universe and call it home. With a final sip of his drink, he stood, stretching and feeling the satisfying ache of muscles well used. "Time to call it a night then," Ree nodded, rising to join him. "Yeah, tomorrow's another day after all." "Another chance to stick it to the Inkali," Cashin said with a grin. "After all, who'd want to miss that?" They laughed, the sound carrying into the night, a beacon of defiance against the cold. As they headed back into the warmth of Redhaven, Cashin felt a sense of belonging, of certainty in the uncertain. They had faced one battle and emerged stronger, more united than ever before. And whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it head on. Together. And for Cashin, that was more than enough.